Assalamu alaikum. This presentation is related with the anti-money laundering risk and compliance framework. This particular topic is related with the sanctions, types of sanctions, impact of sanctions. So let's start with the presentation. Here is my presentation. So we'll talk about the sanctions, types of sanctions, impact of sanctions. This is the part 1 and we'll cover the rest of the topic in the part 2 and part 3. So as per concern with this topic, the first of all, everyone would like to know that who is imposing the sanction and who is being imposed by the sanctions. So first of all, let's see that the sanctions are imposed by a sanction authority and it is being imposed on a country, either a group, an organization or an individual. So as we're concerned with the matter that why are these sanctions are being imposed, these sanctions might be imposed due to some economic circumstances, might be due to some political, military or social issues on that. So first of all, we understand that is some sort of the restrictions applied by authority on another entity. Entity is country, group, individual or any particular country. So reasons are explained, and as we're concerned with the types of the restriction and popular name of few entities on which restrictions are imposed, the authority here we can quote for understanding, basic understanding is United Nations sanctions imposed on Al-Qaeda and imposed on Iran, a country, Iraq, while Al-Qaeda is an organization. Similarly, you see that the US sanctions, it is being imposed on different entities like Cuba, which is a country, imposed on Korea, and on the other side you see European Union sanctions which are imposed on China and on the other entities which are being mentioned over here. So first of all, we understand sanctions are some sort of restrictions applied on different entities, and we have quoted some examples. Let's go into the detail. So when we go into the detail, we came to know that the sanctions are of different types. For example, these are economic sanctions, maybe diplomatic sanctions, military sanctions, sports sanctions and environmental sanctions. So these are the different sanctions can be imposed on an individual or an entity. So here in this matter, you will see that we are more concerned with the economic sanctions. Therefore, we are first defining the economic sanctions. So economic sanctions as concerned, the economic sanctions are commercial and financial sanctions. Commercial and financial sanctions are financial penalties applied by one or more countries against targeted self-governing state or group or individual. So economic sanctions are the commercial and financial penalties imposed to a country or a self-governing government or group. So you see, as for concerned with the economic sanctions, it can be known as into the multiple aspects, like we can say that asset freezing means in which assets are freezed in the account or in the wherever these are being placed, and it cannot be transferred to anyone or it cannot be cashed or used. Similarly, capital restraints, in the capital restraint we limit the movement of capital to the particular entity. So this entity is not being provided with the capital. Arms embargoes means we impose some sort of embargoes on the armed forces like weapons, and foreign aid restriction in which foreign aid is being stopped or restricted to up to a limit. Trade by barriers related with import and exports and tariff barriers in which we impose some sort of tax on the international business activity, restriction on the financial transactions of particular entity, and obviously the travel bans on the citizens of particular state or particular territory. So these are, we can say, the economic sanctions. When we are talking about the sanctions, economic sanctions, economic sanctions are also called embargoes. It is consisted of you can say trade sanctions, and it is on the other type is the financial sanctions. So these are the two types of the main breakup of the sanctions. Here we have written a little bit in detail. For example, the transaction sanctions are related with the import and export. So as for concern with the export, will limit the sales. It means that the entity whom we have imposed sanctions reduce the export, either stop the exports, which leads to cut down the foreign earnings or foreign exchange earning of that particular country. Import sanctions are related with that. We are stopping that this entity cannot import raw material and other things which are required to it, means that the international volume of international trade being restricted towards a limit or either being stopped. So financial sanctions is on the other hand related with the prohibition of government loans, mean government will either not get the loan or loan are being reduced. Interruption in the commercial finance, means business finance, and on the other hand asset freezing. So these are the financial sanctions. When we are talking about these main two classes of the economic sanctions, when we apply the sanctions, we can also say, and we can also classify according to the entity which is being imposed. On the entity imposing, we can classify it into comprehensive sanctions, targeted sanction, and sectorial sanctions. When we are talking about the comprehensive sanctions are generally imposed on a country. Means this is imposed the sanctions against a full-fledged country like Iran and Cuba, imposed by US. And as for concern with the targeted or smart sanctions, these are imposed on a person or particular or specific entities. And sectorial sanction as concerned, these are being imposed on a particular industry or a particular sector of an economy, which is going to hit or causing some harm to the global business or global economy. So on the one by one we can talk on each of them. First of all, we are going towards comprehensive sanctions. Comprehensive sanctions, as I have already explained, that these are the sanctions imposed against a country, like it is being imposed on Iran and Cuba, and it's prevent all transactions, means it cannot do some sort of buying and selling outside the country, means no import, no export, no provision of financial financing, means they cut the business finance or sources to finance the business, technology also being stopped, and embargoes are also employed on the full trade. And obviously the embassies and you can say consulates of different countries are also being closed, mean there is no diplomatic relationship with the country. It sometimes cause some sort of further impact of it and cause some serious impacts. Likewise, sometimes it generate conflicts and add fuel to fire. It can generate further conflicts. Another problem associated with these sort of restrictions, that it cannot discriminate between individual and residents, which means that among the people who are you can say responsible for some sort of terrorist activities or being culprits, the innocent people also impact, means civilians are being also impacted in a bad way, and on the other hand we can say these are a little bit inhuman as concerned with the comprehensive sanctions. As compared to that, if we go towards the targeted sanctions, these are also called smart sanctions. These sanctions, first of all, greater discriminate between individuals and among the individuals who are culprit and who are innocent. So these are targeted towards a specific group, and similarly it avoid the pain to the all civilians. So therefore these are little bit more targeted towards focus on the target. As for concern with the um, sectorial sanctions, sectorial sanctions are generally imposed on a specific sector or specific industry of the responsible entity, but it's definitely going to hurt. The reason why we impose is that these sort of activity hurt the other global activities or other global businesses, and that causes serious harm to them. Therefore these sectors are being banned or being sanctioned. So these sanctions are narrow, even smart sanctions, and highly tailored, means we have some sort of plan to impose them, and a little bit guesswork is done, a little bit analytical work is done about its impact, and obviously targeted toward a specific sector. So these are the particular, you can say, the sectorial sanctions. So here we gone through the all three of them, that is we called the comprehensive sanctions, then targeted sanctions, and then we have talked about the sectorial sanctions. Now we are going towards the to see the immediate impact of the sanctions. When we are going towards the immediate impact of the sanctions, we see that um, the country or the entity on which we imposed the sanctions, export not purchased abroad, its goods are not being purchased, and on the other hand potentially creeping effect, means it has serious effect, obviously the political and economical instability, and more cost to some sort of bureaus or some sort of departments take over the specific decision of the country. So it might be destabilize the whole system, and obviously has some sort of creeping effect and shortage of goods inside the country. So these sort of impacts can be created, that we can see in detail when we are talking about the impact of economic sanctions. Particularly if there is shortage of goods, you will observe there is some sort of inflation inside the country, and higher inflation lead to higher interest and fall of foreign direct investment, because people don't trust on these sort of entities, and when there is inflation inside, higher rate of interest naturally cause a devaluation in exchange rate, cost reducing cost of reducing inflation cause the impact of inflation and devaluation, and harder to fund the debts. The debts are being difficult to finance, and decline the export revenue, because of exports are not accepted, are being sanctioned by the authority, and that cause decline in the overall volume of the international business, which causes lack or decline in the foreign exchange reserves of the country and leads to a serious impact on the economy. So if we are quote an example that FATF impose some restriction sanctions on Pakistan, and we observe after that the inflation, which is in a single digit, move towards double digit, and to somehow it's creep up to 20 to more than 20% inflation we observe in the country. So next is that the potential impact on particular country. So increase the cost to consumer, and these are impact to those countries who are imposing it. The country imposed it bear some sort of cost, likewise increase the cost and businesses. Means if a country like US imposing sanctions of another country, so as a result of it US may need to buy the material and goods from another source which is got little more costly. Likewise, sanction imposed on Russia cost higher to the European Union countries to buy the energy, gas and other sources. So it might cost increase in the cost and potentially economic losses and increase the cost of doing business. But the imposing countries are very much clear this cost is not more than the cost of the international peace, law and order in the world, and obviously the making a system justice. So therefore they bear this sort of cost and about that to maintain law and order and the peace in the globe. So these are some sort of activities we're talking about, and then rest of the topic will be covered in the video number 2 and video number 3. Thanks for joining. Allah Hafiz.